Hey everyone, BC Richard here on behalf of BrightFunded. Let's take a look at the week ahead. So let's start with our red folder news for the week. And as I said before, I'm really heavily focused on the US market. So today we've got Empire State Manufacturing Index. We then move through to Tuesday. We've got core retail sales month on month and retail sales month on month as well. Moving through to Thursday, we've got unemployment claims. We've seen the volatility that can inject into the market. And then we close out Friday with flash manufacturing PMI and flash services PMI. Please do be aware that if you are trading the Forex markets, that we have news affecting Australian markets, obviously the US, as we mentioned before. We've got British markets being affected, New Zealand dollar, Swiss markets, as well as the euro. Okay, so we're going to start today and kick off with Bitcoin. Again, we're going to focus on the weekly and then move on to the daily. And then we're going to move on to ETH. We'll do Euro USD, USD JPY, gold, and then we're going to take a look at the NASDAQ, the NQ contract. Okay, so first of all, here on Bitcoin on the weekly, this is the previous all-time high from back in November 2021. As I've covered on our previous recaps, and our look forwards to the week, this is a key level for me. We can see it acts almost like a point of control. We can see price action sticking to this. We did close above it here, but now we've come back underneath, meaning that is another sign of weakness here, unfortunately, for Bitcoin. Now, while we hold this very slim weekly fair value gap, then it's very, very difficult on a high time frame to be overly bearish here. So whilst we hold this on a weekly scale, we start to close, or we do close below this, then I'm actually starting to target the lows down here for the next resting liquidity at 56,697 flat. Now, moving this on to a daily. Now, we can see here we've got our weekly gap. Now, we need to remember that's a weekly gap. So to close under that, we need a weekly close. Something that is very much of interest to me here is this daily fair value gap. Okay, so I think if we look at the expansion leg higher that we've undergone here, so when we took liquidity from the lows all the way up here to the current high, this sits in the lower 50% of this range. I really like a retracement down into here. Now, again, remember, we've got liquidity resting below this low, which was from Friday, so we want to see the reaction from here. But we are now starting to downtrend here on the daily. So looking for the next level that we can find some support, I think we could come down into this, meaning that we drop into the 50% of this range. And then if we look at that again on the weekly, that could, if it does recover, just represent a wick below and a recovery, which would be a sign of strength. Moving across now onto Ethereum, and this plan has been pretty simple for a little while now. Okay, we've got this large fair value gap here on a weekly scale. When price came in and we took this higher here, there was an expectation for price to draw back down into this form of internal liquidity. Now we want to see what kind of reaction we get here, because looking at this in the same vein, we have now retraced that 50%. We did see that strong reaction here. However, we are seeing this kind of bearish continuation. All right, so I want to be watching for what kind of reactions we get here. I'm very interested to see if we are going to continue lower, what happens at the swing low down here, which obviously, unless this gets taken, if this sets, then it sets the swing low. If it doesn't, then it's still the prior week's low, which is a good liquidity pool, and that's set down at 3,356 area. Okay, so moving on to the daily now. Now, on this one, we can see quite clearly that it's this kind of order block here. Although this is very small, if we draw across the base of this, this is the area that I'd be interested in seeing price come back to. We can see we've had a little bit of resurgence here. Again, we are, delivering from a high time frame bullish gap here. Obviously, if we continue to show weakness down here, we have got a very, very slender gap below us here. Close below this in the region of where price is at the moment. And again, I think we do make a move to that same level, 3,356, which here is the swing low. As we can see, that has been confirmed. So as it stands, obviously we have to respect market structure here as well, which is bearish. If we start to get closes above this, then I'd feel like we're coming up for this high up here. And we can see that that is set at 3,981. Do also be aware of this interior high here. Now, moving on to Euro USD, This one was very interesting here. We can see, obviously, we gapped below this. We came back up to fill it, and now we've moved lower. So this is from our previous week's chart. Now, this is an area that I'm really keen to see hold on Euro USD. Now, this was a bearish gap here that we closed through. When we do that, our expectation is that price is now looking for liquidity higher up in this cage, which is when we were targeting this higher. We talked about this last week, how that's the level that's currently capping price action. Then when we came down, we failed to find support in this area, okay? And then we've kind of sold off lower. So while we continue to hold this, then again, it's a little bit treacherous to be bearish here. If the week does close below this, however, then I would expect price to reach down for the 1.06 level. Let's take a look at this now on the daily. And the daily, we can see we had this big gap up here, okay, which did its job of containing price. Price came down, we set the gap. Price drew up into this and then continued on its bearish trajectory. Now, we do have this swing low sat down here as well, which is of interest, which is at 1.06. 06494, sorry. We can see how that kind of plays in with our high time frame theory. We could easily come and wick down below this, remembering that this is a weekly inversion. So again, we could wick down into this, take liquidity resting below those lows. If we recover this, it would merely represent a wick down on the weekly scale, and we would hold this area. However, we do have liquidity resting lower down here, as we covered, and we've got these, which on a lower time frame will be a really interesting liquidity pool as well. So at the moment, we have to retain a bearish bias here on the daily due to market structure and the fact that we're respecting bearish fair value gaps. So as we move on to USD JPY, we've kind of taken a different approach to this one, right? Because we had such a clear and obvious inside bar pattern made up from this candle here, which high and low makes the mother bar high and mother bar low. Then we set this, which is the inside bar. Only when this candle is set and it fails to take either the high or the low. Yeah, you can't take either. So it becomes an inside week, okay? This becomes the inside bar pattern. We treat them like ranges. So this was the range high and the range low of the inside bar. So when we closed above the inside bar high here, we said as long as we hold this, and again, wicks down into this area, okay, unless you get the close. We closed in here, then we would target the liquidity resting below the inside bar low. We didn't. We had this nice reaction with a bullish pin bar candle here with a short nose. While we hold above here, I believe the draw is higher towards the mother bar higher, which is at 160.209. Now, breaking that down onto a daily scale, this here was very much of interest to me. So we set this order block by closing above the body of this candle. Now we did wick above and take this higher, so we can see that we had a rejection here. But whilst we hold this level, then my expectation is that price is reaching up here towards the prior day's high. Okay, so Friday's high, which is set at 158.257. If we start to close back below this, then I'd be looking towards this wick low down here, which is at 155.716. Remembering as well that we'd want to watch this on the higher time frame to see if we do, as the week closes out, get a close back within the inside bar, in which case I would then expect further downside price action. So moving on to gold, we've got our liquidity levels marked out here on the weekly. Price, as we can see, is moving down. It's back within this gap here. Now, the gap has kind of been rebalanced down to here, and it set us a really key low. A low or a high resting within a fair value gap are often really, really good liquidity pools. So my expectation at the moment would be for price to reach down to this. One thing that we have done here is we have closed above the body of the prior week. Now, the issue I have here is where we have consecutive down close weeks, I would consider this whole area as one large order block. So I don't think that a close above here guarantees that we move to this higher. However, we are reacting here. We have taken some previous liquidity from here, but I think the obvious liquidity in the swing low, which is sat down here at 2,277.09. So I would favor a move down, potentially to see a sweep of this, a reaction from a more unbalanced part of the gap, for then price to start making an attack higher. And then I'd be looking towards the 2,387.67 level. So let's pop this onto the daily now. And the daily is really nice and clear here, okay? So we've got this nice bearish gap above us here. Price has cleared out these lows here, also taken this low. Now we expect price to draw back up into this. If we close above this, then the expectation is for price to come after this and then this. But while we remain within it, then lower prices are expected. And we can see that we have a swing low sat down here as well, which is at 2,295.55, and one below here that are kind of relative equal lows as well, which are often very good liquidity pools, which is sat at 2,286.72. So again, whilst we're delivering from this, expectation is for price to continue to push down. However, definitely be monitoring these areas for a reaction to see if price can catch the bids needed to get back and be in a bullish structure. So to close off today, we're going to take a look at the NASDAQ, the NQ1 contract. And here on the weekly, obviously, as we can see, and anybody that's been paying any attention to these markets can see that this has been on a real tear. Now, we can see here, we created this beautiful gap. Price held this absolutely superbly. Again, why really important, we wait for these closes. If we're looking at a weekly scale, we can't start to get bearish here till we close below this. We didn't, we wicked down, recovered it, and then again set this beautiful bullish engulfing candle which set this order block, and then price has been running away since. Now we are in price discovery on the NASDAQ contract, so we need to remember that typically the way I approach this anyway is whilst we're this bullish and while we're chasing all-time highs and setting new all-time highs, we remain bullish until it's broken. So moving on to the daily, we can see some gapping here as well. What we're looking for here is actually quite tricky because price is moving up so aggressively. I would definitely have an eye on this kind of area here. Okay, and would love in an ideal scenario to see price come back towards this, and this will give us a really good indication here. Should we pull back and hold here, I think it's a great place to look for longs again in that kind of market where I'm looking to long this until it breaks. What would represent a break here? A break for me here would be, if we close below this, but technically, if we're looking at this here as well, we have kind of got an extended gap down to here. This is kind of a breakaway, or, also we're looking at some volume imbalance in here as well. But I would target this area first. I think while we're this bullish, it can be a little bit tricky to stay and really commit to those long setups. But I'd be using the lower time frame to just really make sure that they're super clean. Close below this, and I think we really could start to refill some of these inefficiencies lower, and in which case I would then look to these really kind of quite thin order block down here, these two adjoining down close candles, to see if we get support. We can see when we closed above them here, price dipped in, found the bids, and then moved higher. So a move down here, again, closing below this, I'm not just going to jump bearish on a higher time frame, but more on an intraday scale, I think we could push lower. But let's remember how bullish this is at the moment. And if we're drawing down to these kind of levels, I think it's more likely we find support in and around here or down here before continuation further forward. And that concludes our weekly outlook. Wishing you all a great week ahead, and we look forward to seeing you trading with us over at BrightFunded.